When a firm is making a loss in the short run, it has to make an important decision. Should it continue production or should it shut down? To make this decision, we compare average revenue (AR) with average variable cost (AVC). There are three possibilities. If AR is greater than AVC, the firm should continue production. If AR equals AVC, the firm is exactly at the shutdown point. It can either continue or shut down. But if AR is less than AVC, the firm should stop production. So the key rule is simple. Produce as long as average revenue is at least equal to average variable cost. Let's look at each situation on the graph. The shutdown point occurs when average revenue or price is equal to average variable cost. First, determine the equilibrium output from the MR and MC intersection and trace down to QE. Next, trace to the demand curve to identify the corresponding price. The ATC curve shows the firm's total average cost. At this point, the firm may still be experiencing a loss. Now, focus on the price or average revenue earned by the firm. Next, compare this with the average variable cost curve. At this exact point, P equals AR equals AVC. The firm's revenue is just sufficient to cover its variable cost. Therefore, the firm is indifferent between continuing production and shutting down. This is why we call it the shutdown point. Now, consider a firm that is making a loss but where average revenue is still greater than average variable cost. First, determine the profit maximizing output where MR equals MC. Then, identify the corresponding price from the demand curve. This gives us the average revenue earned per unit. Now, compare this price with average variable cost. Notice that AR is higher than AVC. This is the important condition. Although the firm is making a loss, it should continue production in the short run. Why? Because its revenue is sufficient to cover all variable costs and also contributes towards part of its fixed cost. So remember, a loss does not automatically mean shut down. As long as AR is greater than AVC, the firm can continue operating. Now let's look at the opposite situation. Here is the price or average revenue received by the firm. Again, we identify the equilibrium quantity based on MR equals MC. This tells us the revenue earned per unit. Now, compare the firm's cost with this revenue. Here, average variable cost is higher than average revenue. In other words, AR is less than AVC. The firm cannot even cover its variable cost from the revenue it earns. Therefore, continuing production would create even more losses. The best decision is to stop production in the short run. By shutting down, the firm avoids further variable cost and only has to bear its fixed costs. Now let's move from the short run to the long run. Remember what normally happens when firms earn supernormal profit in a competitive market? New firms are attracted into the industry. But in a monopoly market, barriers to entry prevent this from happening. The monopolist again maximizes profit where MR equals long run marginal cost LRMC. From that equilibrium output, we move up to the demand curve to obtain the price. In the example shown, the monopoly produces around 15 units, charges a price of 12, while a long-run average total cost is lower, around 10. Therefore, price remains above average total cost. The result is supernormal profit, even in the long run. So, the key message is monopoly power plus barriers to entry allow supernormal profit to continue in the long run. Another interesting feature associated with monopoly power is price discrimination. Price discrimination occurs when a seller charges different prices to different buyers for the same product or service. For example, as shown here, two patients may receive a similar service but be charged different prices. However, several conditions are needed for price discrimination to work. First, the seller must be a price maker. Second, the market must be separated into different groups or sub-markets, and resale between these markets should be prevented. Third, the groups should have different elasticities of demand. And finally, the cost of separating the markets should be low enough for the strategy to be profitable. So, the key idea is same product, different buyers, and different prices. There are three main types of price discrimination. The first is first degree price discrimination, sometimes called perfect price discrimination. Here, the seller attempts to charge each consumer the maximum price that he or she is willing to pay. An auction is one example that can help us understand this concept. The second is second degree price discrimination. Here, the price changes according to the quantity purchased or the amount of usage. Examples include different electricity usage rates, photocopy charges, or internet data packages. The third is third degree price discrimination. Here, consumers are divided into identifiable market groups, and each group is charged a different price. For example, a theme park may charge 150 ringgit for adults and 90 ringgit for children. So remember the distinction. First degree is by individual willingness to pay, while second degree is by quantity or usage, and lastly, third degree by customer group or market segment. Finally, let's compare monopoly with perfect competition using this graph. Under perfect competition, equilibrium occurs where price equals marginal cost. Tracing down from this point gives the larger competitive output. For monopoly, equilibrium is determined where MR equals marginal cost. This produces a lower level of output. Now, let's identify the price associated with monopoly equilibrium. We can also compare the relevant cost and competitive price levels. The monopoly price in this illustration is 12. The graph also shows a long-run average cost benchmark of 10 at the monopoly output. Under perfect competition, the price is lower at 8. The monopoly produces only 15 units. Perfect competition produces a higher quantity of 18 units. So, what can we conclude? Under perfect competition, P equals MR equals AR equals MC. Compared with monopoly, perfect competition generally results in a lower price and a higher quantity of output. The monopoly restricts output and charges a higher price because it possesses market power. Let's summarize the major differences. In terms of quantity, perfect competition produces and sells more, while monopoly produces less. In terms of price, perfect competition has a lower price, while monopoly has a higher price. In terms of profit in the long run, firms under perfect competition earn normal profit, while a monopoly can maintain supernormal profit because of barriers to entry. And in terms of efficiency, perfect competition is presented here as more efficient while monopoly is less efficient. So, from the consumer's point of view, perfect competition generally provides lower prices, more choices, and greater efficiency. Now it's your turn. Click the button and try yourself. Good luck! Well done! You have now completed the topic on monopoly market structure. You have learned the characteristics of monopoly, how a monopolist determines its short-run equilibrium, how to calculate profit and loss, how to apply the shutdown rule, and why supernormal profit can continue in the long run. Before moving on, make sure you remember two important ideas. For profit maximization, MR equals MC. And for the shutdown decision, compare AR with AVC. Thank you for learning with me. You have completed the topic. Well done.